Excellent health आ रहा है. Go live. Go live. आ गया go live. Okay, I'm gonna put this down, sir. Okay. Alright. Fine. I think it's come, right? Okay. How am I gonna know when to start? I need my phone. Can you put it on silent? Just give it to me. I can do it this. Yeah, I'm on live right now. Can you give me the phone? Okay. So that I can see what it is. Someone comments something. Alright. I can do it this. Yeah, I'm on live right now. Can you give me the phone? Alright. Okay, so today I'm going to discuss the concept of surface contamination and the concept of disinfective coatings. Now, what's interesting about this concept is that when we talk about infection, we often forget that there are 2 or 3 ways in which you can transmit infection interpersonally. Okay, the major way that we usually talk about is, of course, if somebody comes and sneezes on you directly, and we're going to discuss all of this. But before that, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Shrey Dhawan, and we'll be doing this lecture. And we are from Intuitive 8 Healthcare, and we've been in the disinfection space for the last couple of years. And given the COVID crisis and all of the havoc that it's brought, we thought that it's the right time to get into talking about the importance of not just personal protective equipment, but also things that involve protection in terms of being able to stop formite-based infection. And that's the really important thing, right? So, today let's talk about the concept of disinfection coatings. Firstly, I'd like you to understand that the conventional protection that we talk about involves a clinic that is clean, alright? And a clinic that is clean will immediately get infected after the first patient walks in. And once the first patient walks in, we cannot just say that it is the aerosols that will be generated from the dental clinic that will be contaminating the space, but it will also be all the areas that the person has touched. Those sites subsequently become formites of infection, or sites of infection where people can pick up the infection and spread it to other people. These kind of areas sometimes remain contaminated for extremely long periods of time, and we'll be addressing that later. And even Dr. Viruses such as the COVID virus has been seen to persist on metal, glass and other surfaces for as long as 72 hours afterwards. So if we consider that the risk of a patient is exclusive on the basis of the contact that we have with them, which might be a few minutes to a few seconds, that would be an inaccurate assessment. Right? Now let's get down to the conventional problem or the concept of surface protection. Right? So each time a patient contacts something, they leave behind a little bit of infection, which we term formite-based infections. So as aerosols are generated, they float in the air for a little while, but eventually they drop down on surface and then become formite-based infections. So even though an aerosol can be infective for a couple of hours, what's really important is that once the aerosol has settled on the surface, it can be infective for almost 3 days. Now, one thing that I'd like to express is that conventionally, what people are doing is they are sanitizing surfaces. That sanitation is happening with an alcohol-based rub. And conventionally, what alcohol does is that it dehydrates the microorganism and then it evaporates. This process is known to cause revolatilization. Like it takes the bacteria that is on the surface and it brings it back into the air, regenerating aerosol, which can then be inhaled. It's this concept that gives rise to the prospective protection or the concept of InstaOT. Basically, what we suggest is that once the aerosol settles, it gets onto the surface, it remains deactivated, and it does not get volatilized again. This is the concept that most of surface disinfection is to be based on. In fact, just 15 minutes back, I was going news, and Sir shared an interesting article that talks about the concept of that. Shamli, can you please put the link on Instagram as well? So this talks about the concept of not allowing revolatilization, as well as the concept of inactivation on contact. Right. Another thing that I'd like to talk about is that if you look at this, once the first patient walks in, he infects the place, and if your cycle of infection is of disinfection is such that you're only disinfecting once in 24 hours, then as soon as the second patient walks in, he walks into an environment that looks like this. Right. So what you need is something that stays on the surface, persists on the surface, and resists removal. Right. So where does this concept of InstaOT come? InstaOT is basically a coating mechanism that has been proven by a study where there's a short story I'd like to tell you about. There was a hospital in Boston that got flooded, right? Once that hospital got flooded, the government had to make a decision whether they should shift the hospital elsewhere and build a new building and take on the kind of expense that would be, or the other option would be to treat it in such a way that they would do some antimicrobial coatings where they would be able to have that hospital habitable again. Once they didn't, so Dow Chemicals came up with this chemical, which was 3-methyloxysilyl propyl dimethyl octadyl ammonium chloride, which was then patented as the bacteria antimicrobial. And after a couple of modifications, and it is, as it's stated in this study, it was evaluated to have safe airborne microbial concentration for 30 months. And it says in the last line, this result shows a significant and sustained reduction of viable airborne microorganisms. This goes to show that the coating can actually reduce the amount of bacteria present in the air, right? So I'd like to introduce you to the concept of the Swachh clinic. Now, conventional methods that people use are hypochlorite, chlorhexidine, and alcohol. But the concept is this. These work before the patient walks in. If you scrub the clinic is clean. As soon as the patient walks in, he transmits some of his infection to all the places that he touches. That does not provide an effect that lasts very long. In fact, what ends up happening is that you end up building reservoirs of infection. You end up building areas in your space where bacteria lie and proliferate in mass. That then becomes dangerous and becomes what we call nests of infection or reservoirs of infection, which is a concept that ICMR is actually talking about right now. The way InstaOT works and why it's different is that it involves an organosilane compound as well as which is applied by an electrostatic coating. Now, the concept of an electrostatic coating is this, that if you have this product and you spray it from this side, you will see that this surface of the product gets all of the spray and this surface of the product will seem to be as though it is in the night, right? What electrostatic does is that when it hits this, charges the entire surface of the entire surface and spreads uniformly around the surface to form a coating which then adheres because of the organosilane and has a physical killing property because of the tertiary amine. Obviously, that sounds like a lot of chemistry, but that's why it is such it's a molecule that's worth introducing to healthcare. Significantly different from other products. Once it is sprayed onto the surface, it is active. It's applied. It is active during the time of the exposure to a patient, and it remains active even after the exposure. This negates the effect of the aerosol. Right? Now, if you talk about aerosols, see, the truth about aerosols is that everything that goes up comes down. When you generate aerosol in your environment, you will realize that the only predictable way to save yourself from this is a mask and a face shield, right? Of course, and a PPE, and basically the personal protective equipment is the only thing that can save you from an aerosol. Fogging is completely arbitrary, and it is about as effective as good ventilation when you talk about the bacterial load in the air. The only thing that effectively will remove the bacterial or the viral load of the air will be UV light, which we know causes serious problems, especially as you age, like age-related macular degeneration, early cataract, and other things like that. So aerosols become such a controversial issue because we need to protect ourselves from the aerosols when they are generated, but also protect ourselves from the formite-based infections that come into play after the aerosols settle on surfaces, right? So that is the thing to be thinking about and focusing on when it comes to dental clinics. Dr. Amit Lal will be talking about this further. Right? Now, where all does your disinfection? Right? So hypochlorite is the disinfection of choice these days. It's what everybody is talking about. Now, the real reason behind why it's popular is because it's cheap and it was always available and it was always being made in large quantities. And hence, as soon as this pandemic hit, these are the guys who said, hey, let's push our hypochlorite product, and that's what people started adopting. Right? There was very little thought that went into understanding it really is. We had hypochlorite done in a house nearby where they did the staircase, and even crossing the house for 3 days meant having, because at that location I knew the guy that did the hypochlorite and he did it for the actual concentration that it should be done. So if hypochlorite is done well, then your room becomes habitable for about 2 or 3 days. If it's not done well, then it's just not done and it hardly matters, right? So that's one big problem with hypochlorite. Hypochlorite is excellent for tabletops, windows, doors and other things like that, but that's for glass. But if you put hypochlorite on wood, on paint, on metal, you will see that it causes corrosion, it causes staining, it can cause bleaching of the fabric, rapid deterioration of the fabric and other things like that. I would not recommend putting hypochlorite on your aerators and on your metal couplings of your aerators and your physio dispensers. It will reduce their lifespan absolutely significantly. Also, a hypochlorite spray is kind of generic. It's just a spray and there are lots of areas between the sprayed area which don't really get the hypochlorite. It needs to be scrubbed or wiped, and hence what is better than actually just a spray of hypochlorite would be to use a disinfectant wipe. But that comes with the obvious restrictions, right? Also, by spraying hypochlorite, it's rarely done on the ceiling and it's rarely done on the walls. So it's not, and forget everything else, all the negativity of hypochlorite. If you set it aside, you have to understand that hypochlorite works for about 15 minutes. So if you do hypochlorite in the morning, first of all, you will not find the clinic habitable for a couple of hours. You've done it last night and your first patient walks in at 10 o'clock. You have to understand that from the second patient onwards, you are no longer providing any protection to nor your clients. Right? Now let's come on to alcohol-based disinfectants. Now the thing with alcohol-based disinfectants is that, it sounds cynical, but what happens is that a study was done to see exactly how many of these alcohol-based sanitizers and disinfectants are actually what they claim to be. Like, are they above 70% in terms of proof strength? Do they actually cause the denaturation of proteins that they should? And it was found that 90% of the hand sanitizers and the alcohol-based disinfectants out there have no more than 45 to 55% alcohol. So not only is it expensive, and right now we are seeing a lot of contamination in this. So if you are getting your alcohol-based disinfectants, they need to be branded, and in that case it becomes extremely expensive to use disinfectants to wipe your whole clinic in between patients in order to be able to provide the kind of protection that you need in this pandemic to be safe, right? Also, alcohol has limited efficacy. We know that repeated application of alcohol on a surface will suppress the bacterial growth. It will suppress most of the viral. Alcohol-based rubs are not used to sanitize HIV blood, and hence we can conclude that alcohol is not extremely effective in the case of all viruses, right? Also, alcohol actually gives a preferential growth to fungus, and hence if alcohol is used for a very long period of time, you might find that area giving rise to fungal growth. And just like all of the other things, alcohol has no long-lasting effect, and it's simply a spray, and it's not a coating, and it doesn't come of anything. Essentially, alcohol is also not very useful in terms of fabric, and that limits its utility. Right? That I've come across these days is defoggers. Now see, defoggers principally use benzalkonium chloride as well as a form of amine or chlorhexidine and other things like that. The justification that some of the marketing people give is that this is handling your aerosol. But I mean, if you've been a doctor for anything more than a minute, you know that that's not the way that you sterilize air, right? A droplet of air and a droplet of virus will not interact with each other in the air in order to meet the minimal inhibitory concentration of that bacteria or the virus. And hence, does defoggerize your air? Logically, it really doesn't, right? It's about as effective as having your window open. Plus, defoggers have been known to give rise to ocular and mucus irritation. And forget all of that, Not only does it need to be every day, it's got no lasting protection, just like all of the other things. If you have defogged your clinic the previous day, then it protects your first patient, right? And there's also, defoggers will tend to go up into the air and then settle like aerosols, and hence there are areas where you will still have microbial films developing, for example, under your chair or below your table and other things like that. All of these areas should be coated with an electrostatic spray. So now, if you talk about InstaOT coatings, then where exactly do they work? InstaOT coating is shown to be effective on glass, metal, as well as fabric. Now this is where it gets interesting. If you have a solution that you can apply to a fabric, and you can be sure that no matter how many patients come and sit on this sofa over the next 6 months, none of them are going to transfer the infection to each other in their absence. Like, they're not going to transfer from patient A to patient B via the sofa, then you know that you have something that is really worth investing in, right? On top of that, there is EPA clearance for this certification, for this chemical, the US EPA clearance. And what this means essentially is that this chemical is completely safe and is not going to discolor anything. It's safe for children. After the drying period, about 15 to 18 minutes, it's perfectly fine to re-inhabit that area. And that's the beautiful thing about it. Now, the common question that comes up is that, does this work? I mean, I've seen it all over Instagram, I've seen it all over Facebook, I know you 150 clinics, but does this work, right? Being doctors, we thought what we needed to do was test it in a way that we can make it convincing to you. So what we did is, this is a dental clinic where after a chlorhexidine rub was used with a gauze right handle of this chair, we did a test with an ATPase meter. Now what an ATPase meter does is that, using a swab, it picks up the ATP present on any surface, which basically indicates how infected that surface was. Are we good? The stream is live? Right, it picks up, so in this case, as you can see, once the bud picks up the ATPase and it's inserted into the meter, we can see that it is as high as 709 reading, which basically means that the biofilm is so thick, it is so thick that that biofilm and those bacteria are getting volatilized back into the air, and that is extremely problematic, right? So then what we did is, sorry for the distraction, so we went ahead with the coating. After we did the coating, 10 minutes later we saw a reading of 0, and sorry, soon after this live I'm going to show you a bunch of other coatings and a bunch of other readings. And this is actually a part of what we do as part of the service, where what we will come to your clinic, we will show how contaminated it is before. But after we coat it, we show that the contamination has dropped to 0. And then after 30 days or 60 days, or maybe on a surprise inspection, we'll come in and prove to you that that surface still has an active antimicrobial effect. Just for your knowledge, this test is called an ATPase test and is an FDA approved method of evaluating bacterial contamination of surfaces. I'd like to share a small video with you about of a coating happening. This coating, as you involves a dental clinic, and where we do the roof as well as the chairs, and there's no issue about the lights and the electricals and the physios and all of that. It basically coats everything, and this is an electrostatic machine, which you can see the cord goes down, and it's actually a really long cord, but it's not right. And so one of the good areas to get done is the light handles as well. And this kind of coating eventually gives rise to something that can be protected and tested for up to 6 months. Now, one of the things that we have tried to introduce, it's been almost 2 years that Dr. Amit and me have been working on this, is the concept of a Swachh Clinic certification. Sir is going to talk about this more, but the whole idea that went behind it was, we wanted to be able to do something where, as a practitioner, if you have taken the to go ahead and get something done for the benefit of your patients, we want you to be able to show it to your patients. If you're able to market yourself to your patients for something that you have done for the public good, that's what InstaOT is all about, right? So that is how it went. And this is an example of a couple of clinics and some of the certificates that we've handed out and that we've gotten the consent for, right? Dr. Amit is now going to join the session and talk a little bit more about surface disinfection, and then we can take some doubts.